Let me tell you something up front. God doesn't restore you to where you were. He restores you to where you were always meant to be. Some of you are praying to go back to the good old days, back to the former job, the old relationship, the version of you before the pain. But restoration isn't about returning, it's about revealing who you are when all the false layers have been stripped away. When we talk about restoration, especially in the context of God's work in our lives, we often imagine it as a return to what once was. We think of it as getting back what we lost, a job, a relationship, a version of ourselves before the storm hit. But divine restoration isn't about rewinding the tape. It's not about dragging us back to the former version of life that we once called good. It's deeper, it's heavier, it's more transformative. Restoration with God is not a return, it's a revelation. God doesn't waste pain. He doesn't sit idle when we're broken. He uses the very pieces of what's shattered to rebuild something that never existed before. And in the process, He doesn't just give us back things, we get back truth. Truth about who we are, truth about what really matters, truth about Him. Restoration reveals identity, not just circumstance. It unveils what the pressure had buried, what the world distorted, and what we forgot in the middle of the fire. You see, when God restores you, He doesn't take you to square one. He takes you to the blueprint, the one He had for you before the failure, before the betrayal, before you even knew what pain felt like. Restoration opens your eyes to the version of you that's been forming in secret, the version the enemy tried to kill, the version that wasn't ready before the crushing, but is now rising from it. And that's why it's not about going back, because going back would mean stepping into a life built on old patterns and limited perspective. The former version of you didn't know your own strength. The past mindset couldn't carry your future mission. God's restoration reveals what the fire refined. It doesn't ignore what you've been through. It redeems it. And in doing so, it shows you not just what you lost, but what you never knew you had. We often think restoration is the end of the battle, but it's actually the beginning of becoming. It's not the finish line, it's the unveiling. You thought you were just getting healed from heartbreak, but now you're realizing that heartbreak broke off your dependency on people for worth. You thought God was restoring your finances, but really, He was revealing that your provision never came from a paycheck. It came from His hand. What looked like loss was always setting the stage for clarity. When you've been restored by God, your lens changes. You stop asking, how can I get back what I had? And you start asking, God, what are you showing me now that I couldn't see then? You stop obsessing over who left and start rejoicing over who you've become. Restoration pulls back the curtain on what was hidden in you all along, the gold that required the fire, the purpose that required the wilderness, and the identity that required everything to be stripped so God could finally show you who you really are. Pain is not just a detour in life, it's often the doorway to transformation. When God is about to shift something significant in your life, pain is usually the first signal. It comes not because He wants to break you for the sake of breaking, but because He wants to make room. Pain has a way of exposing what comfort hides. It reveals what can no longer stay, what must be healed, and what God is preparing to move out of the way so He can elevate you into something greater. We often resist pain. We pray it away. We label it as a sign that something's gone wrong. But in the economy of God, pain is frequently the tool He uses to clear the ground before He builds something new. You can't shift into a new season while carrying the weight of an old one. The grief, the betrayal, the delay, the disappointment, they all feel like setbacks. But in God's hands, they are setups. The pain becomes pressure, and the pressure becomes preparation. It softens the soil of your heart so that new things can be planted. When we're in pain, it feels like everything is falling apart. But often it's not falling apart, it's falling into alignment. God doesn't cause all pain, but He doesn't waste any of it. He allows just enough discomfort to awaken us, to stir us out of complacency, to shift our attention from what was to what's ahead. The pain you feel is often the push God uses to move you into your next. You wouldn't have left that unhealthy situation unless it hurt. You wouldn't have sought God more deeply unless your strength had run out. That kind of pain is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of the shift. We tend to want change without cost. We want transformation without tearing. But God loves you too much to leave you where you are. He knows that comfort can become a cage. So sometimes He uses pain to unlock the door, not to punish you, but to grow you, to free you. Because real change, God-ordained, heart-deep change, rarely happens in places of ease. It happens when your pride cracks, when your plans collapse, and when your strength gives out just enough for His power to step in. There's something holy about the breaking, not because the pain is beautiful, but because of what it produces. You're not the same after it. You think differently. You pray differently. You love with more empathy and walk with more humility. That shift, that's what the pain was preparing you for. And once the shift happens, you realize that what you thought was destroying you was actually developing you. Pain precedes the shift because it clears the path. It strips away what's superficial and leaves only what's solid. And once God has made that space in your heart, He begins the real work, not of restoring you to what you were, but of reshaping you into what you were always meant to be. When God restores you, it shows. You don't have to advertise it. You don't have to convince anyone. Restoration has evidence. It leaves a trail. It produces a kind of fruit that can't be manufactured through willpower or performance. There's a shift in your speech, a peace in your posture, a clarity in your decisions. Something in you changes, and it's not just internal. It becomes visible. The evidence of restoration isn't in what you say, it's in how you live. You begin to respond differently. What used to trigger you doesn't own you anymore. The bitterness that once ruled your heart gets replaced by forgiveness. And not because the situation got fixed, but because you got healed. Restoration matures you. It refines your reactions. You stop needing revenge and start choosing peace. That's not personality, that's transformation. That's the fruit of something supernatural happening on the inside. People around you start to notice. They may not know what changed, but they know something did. You're no longer frantic, performing for validation, or living in survival mode. There's a stillness, a groundedness that doesn't make sense to people who knew your pain. They remember who you were in the fire, but now they see who you are after it. That contrast, that glow after the storm, that's evidence. You start to make decisions that reflect healing, not hurt. You no longer settle for what breaks you just to feel wanted. You no longer chase distractions just to numb the emptiness. Restored people don't operate from desperation. They move from discernment. Restoration teaches you how to wait differently, how to choose wisely, and how to protect your peace without apology. One of the clearest signs of restoration is that you no longer need to prove anything. You don't beg people to stay. You don't chase people who can't see your value. You're not fueled by fear, but by faith. The striving slows down because you've tasted the sufficiency of God. When you've been restored by Him, you start to recognize that everything you were looking for outside of you has already been deposited within you. There's also joy, real joy, not the kind that comes from a good day, but the kind that shows up even in waiting seasons. It's a joy that doesn't make sense unless you've walked through pain and made it out whole. That joy is contagious. It's noticeable. It's not loud or performative, but it lingers in the room after you speak. It softens your tone. It brightens your presence. That's evidence. Restoration changes your rhythm. You start flowing in grace, not grinding in fear. You trust the process more. You stop rushing what God is doing in you. You let go quicker. You rest deeper. And the people who knew the old version of you can't help but ask, what happened? And the answer is simple. God happened. Because when He restores you, He leaves fingerprints all over your life. And the beauty of it is this. You don't have to explain it. You just have to live it. When God restores you, one of the first things people notice isn't how loud your worship becomes or how often you quote scripture. It's the peace that surrounds you. It's not just something you feel internally. It's something you carry into rooms, conversations, and situations. Peace becomes your atmosphere. It settles into your tone, your posture, your responses. You become a thermostat, not a thermometer. You don't reflect the chaos around you. You regulate it with the presence of God within you. This kind of peace isn't ordinary. It's not the result of everything going right. In fact, the most powerful peace is the one that shows up when nothing makes sense. When the job hasn't come through, the diagnosis is still uncertain, the people who hurt you haven't apologized, and yet you're calm, you're steady. Not because the storm disappeared, but because you're no longer anchored to the storm. You're anchored to the one who commands it. There's a difference between numbing and peace. Numbing is escape. It's distraction dressed up as coping. But peace, real peace, is not an escape. It's presence. It's a deep awareness that God is here, that He's not panicked, and if He's not panicked, neither am I. When God restores you, He doesn't just fix what's broken. He establishes a new default in your soul. That default is peace. You don't have to manufacture it. You don't have to strive for it. It begins to flow from a healed place in you. People used to get a version of you that was anxious, easily shaken, constantly proving, always reacting. But now, you're not moved by what used to unnerve you. That toxic comment doesn't rattle you. That delay doesn't derail you. That closed door doesn't destroy you. Because peace has become more than a moment. It's become your mindset. It's not based on your surroundings. It's rooted in your restoration. The evidence of restoration is when you stop losing sleep over what God already settled. You walk into conflict with composure, not because you like confrontation, but because you no longer fear it. You stop rehearsing what could go wrong and start resting in who holds it all together. That quiet confidence isn't pride, it's peace. It's the kind of peace that Philippians 4 talks about, the one that surpasses all understanding. It doesn't just guard your heart. It guards your relationships, your decisions, your reactions. Restored people move differently. They breathe slower. They speak softer. They listen more. Their presence calms the room, not because they've mastered life, but because they've surrendered to the one who holds it. That's what peace looks like. It's not perfect circumstances. It's a perfect anchor. It's the assurance that even when everything's shifting around you, God is steady in you. And once you've tasted that peace, you protect it. You walk away from drama without guilt. You choose boundaries without shame. You don't let urgency rob your soul, because peace is not just what you feel. It's what you carry. It's who you've become. When God restores you, one of the most unexpected but necessary shifts happens in your relationships. People think restoration is just about internal healing, but it always affects your external world. As your heart changes, your connections do too. Relationships begin to realign, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. The people who were once central to your life may fade, and some who were distant may return. It's not personal, it's spiritual. Restoration exposes alignment. It reveals who's walking with you and who's holding you back. There are seasons where God has to isolate you to heal you, not to punish you, but to protect what He's building. In those moments, you might feel like everyone is leaving, but what's really happening is that God is making space for voices that edify, not drain, space for people who see your calling, not just your flaws. You'll start to recognize how certain relationships were attached to the broken version of you, the one who didn't know how to set boundaries, who sought validation in unhealthy places, who tolerated dysfunction just to feel wanted. As you heal, your standards shift. You no longer cling to people out of fear of being alone. You stop chasing attention that costs you your peace, and without even announcing it, your posture changes. People notice it. Some respect it. Others resent it. But either way, the restoration in you starts to draw or repel. That's how you know it's real. You're no longer molding yourself to fit into rooms where you have to shrink. You're walking into spaces where you can breathe and be fully known. God also brings divine connections in your season of restoration. People who speak life. People who challenge you to grow. People who aren't intimidated by your calling, but are committed to helping you carry it. These aren't just friendships, they're covenant connections. You'll realize that alignment isn't about convenience, it's about purpose. Some of the most meaningful relationships in your life won't come from shared history, they'll come from shared vision. And then there's forgiveness. Restoration softens you toward even those who hurt you. Not because what they did was okay, but because your heart has been freed from carrying the weight of resentment. You start releasing people, not necessarily reconnecting, but letting go of the bitterness that tied you to the pain. That release is powerful. It's not weakness. It's evidence that healing has taken root. This realignment isn't always easy. Sometimes it's lonely. Sometimes it's confusing. But it's always necessary because God is not just restoring your soul. He's protecting your purpose. And that means surrounding you with people who can walk with you into your next season. People who understand the weight of your calling, not just the details of your past. That's the beauty of divine restoration. It doesn't just fix what's broken, it reshapes who walks with you as you step into what's next. When God truly restores you, your desires shift in ways you didn't expect. One of the most profound signs of this transformation is that you stop craving the platform and start craving His presence. It's not that you don't care about purpose anymore. It's that you finally understand what sustains it. You no longer chase visibility for validation. You stop measuring your worth by applause, attention, or influence. There's a deep hunger that grows in you, not for recognition, but for communion with God. His presence becomes your priority, not because you're trying to be spiritual, but because nothing else satisfies like it does. Before restoration, it's easy to confuse calling with performance. You strive to be seen. You hustle to be affirmed. Even ministry, leadership, or creativity can become a way of proving something to others, or worse, proving something to yourself. But when God heals those insecure, striving parts of you, you realize that the spotlight doesn't heal identity, it exposes it. It can't fix what's broken, it can only magnify what's already there. So instead of seeking the crowd, you start seeking the quiet. You find peace in places where no one is watching, because that's where you meet the one who truly knows you. The presence of God becomes your safe place, not your backup plan. It's not something you visit, it's something you carry. You stop needing the next big opportunity, the next big connection, the next big moment to feel whole. Restoration teaches you that the most sacred moments happen off stage, off camera, and often in silence. In your car, in your room, on your knees. You learn to love the stillness. You learn to crave it. Because in that stillness, God speaks not just to your assignment, but to your soul. This shift is powerful because it also changes how you approach your gifts. You don't abandon them. You just no longer idolize them. You don't stop serving. You just stop striving. You start to care more about obedience than outcome, more about His voice than your image. That doesn't make you less effective. It makes you more dangerous to the enemy because now you're not doing it for applause. You're doing it from overflow. Restoration humbles you, not in a way that makes you feel small, but in a way that makes God feel big. You start to understand that success is not measured by followers, stages, or likes. It's measured by fruit. And the kind of fruit that lasts can only grow in the soil of God's presence. You're not impressed by the noise anymore. You're drawn to what's real, to what's rooted. You stop asking, how can I get more influence? And start asking, God, how can I stay close? This is when everything changes. When you stop living for the platform and start living from His presence, your life begins to reflect a different rhythm. One that doesn't burn out. One that doesn't break under pressure. One that doesn't need to be seen to stay faithful. That's restoration. And it always draws you back to the feet of Jesus again and again. When God restores you, you stop walking like a question mark and start walking like a declaration. There's a shift in your posture, not out of arrogance, but out of clarity. You're no longer moving through life trying to prove your worth or perform your value. You begin to walk like you know who you are. That identity isn't rooted in what you've done or where you've been. It's rooted in who He says you are. Restoration strips away the false labels, the shame, the insecurity, and replaces them with something unshakable: sonship, daughterhood, divine belonging. Before restoration, you may have walked timidly, uncertain, second-guessing every move, shrinking to fit other people's comfort. You tried to blend in, fit in, survive. You allowed opinions to shape you, rejection to define you, and fear to silence you. But when God does a deep work of healing in your life, that changes. Not because the challenges disappear, but because your core no longer wavers under pressure. You've seen the fire, walked through it, and come out without smelling like smoke. And that survival becomes strength. That process becomes confidence. You start to carry yourself differently, not with a chip on your shoulder, but with peace in your spirit. You don't walk into rooms hoping someone will validate you. You walk in knowing you belong, whether people acknowledge it or not. Because restoration doesn't just change your situation, it changes your stance. It corrects your internal posture. You stop begging for tables and start building your own if necessary, knowing that your value isn't dependent on access, but on assignment. You begin to speak with authority. Not volume, authority. Your voice doesn't have to be loud to carry weight. It's not about dominating, it's about being anchored. You know who sent you. You know what you carry. You're not guessing anymore. You're not living reactive anymore. That identity makes you dangerous, not because you're out to conquer people, but because you're no longer controlled by their opinions. Restoration gives you discernment. You know what to entertain and what to walk away from. You stop showing up to arguments you've outgrown. You stop accepting invitations to battles that distract you from your purpose. You don't explain yourself the way you used to, not out of pride, but because when you know who you are, you don't need to constantly defend who you're not. And even in your quiet moments when no one's around, you stand different. You pray with more depth. You dream with more boldness. You repent quicker. You love harder. You move with a steady rhythm, not chasing, not rushing, just walking, knowing God is with you and that you are who He says you are. This is the fruit of restoration. Identity that doesn't collapse under pressure. Confidence that's not rooted in ego, but in truth. You don't just survive anymore. You walk with purpose. You walk with vision. You walk with conviction. You walk like you've been through something and came out whole. Because when God restores you, He doesn't just fix your path. He restores your posture. When God restores you, the things that once broke you lose their power to bind you. It's not that you forget the pain or pretend it never happened. It's that it no longer owns you. The memories may still exist, but the sting is gone. The grip that the trauma, betrayal, or loss once had on your identity begins to loosen. What once defined your decisions, your fears, your relationships, and your self-worth no longer dictates the direction of your life. You're not ignoring the past, you're just no longer enslaved to it. Restoration is not about erasing the story, it's about redeeming it. God doesn't just heal the wound, He severs the chain. The thing that used to silence you can't shame you anymore. The lie that told you you weren't enough, you don't buy it now. The relationship that left you feeling abandoned, it doesn't control how you love anymore. Because once God restores your identity, He gives you a new lens to look through. You don't see yourself as a victim anymore. You see yourself as victorious. This doesn't happen overnight. Sometimes it starts subtly. You realize you're no longer triggered by certain names, places, or conversations. You find yourself forgiving where you used to fume. You let go without needing closure. That's restoration at work. It's not loud, but it's powerful. It's the quiet freedom of being able to look at what hurt you and say, that doesn't define me anymore. The enemy loves to use your broken places as leverage. He tries to convince you that the failure disqualified you, the divorce ruined you, the rejection proved your worthlessness. But God's restoration silences that narrative. He doesn't just clean you up. He reclaims what was stolen. The years you thought were wasted, He redeems them. The identity you thought was shattered, He rebuilds it with truth. The heart you thought was too damaged to love again, He softens it with grace. You start walking differently, not because you have something to prove, but because you've been set free. You stop dragging the chains of regret and start moving in purpose. You stop rehearsing what they did and start declaring what He's done. Your focus shifts from pain to promise. That's how you know you're no longer bound, you're no longer bitter. It doesn't mean life is suddenly easy. Triggers may still come, but they don't control you. Fear may whisper, but it doesn't lead. The past may knock, but it doesn't get to stay. Because God didn't just patch you up. He pulled you out. He restored the version of you that's rooted in Him, not in what happened to you. That's the beauty of restoration. It gives you back your authority. You get to decide who you are now, not your trauma, not your failure, not your past. You've been broken, yes, but now you're whole, and what once broke you has no more chains on you, not because it didn't hurt, but because healing has the final word. So here's what it all comes down to. When God restores you, it's undeniable. You don't have to announce it. Your life begins to speak it. The shift is visible, the fruit is tangible, and the evidence is unmistakable. You're no longer walking in circles of survival. You're moving with the rhythm of healing. The platform doesn't tempt you like it used to because the presence has become your pursuit. The relationships that were draining fall away, and divine alignments begin to take shape. Peace becomes your atmosphere, not your achievement. What once triggered your insecurity no longer holds weight because your identity is no longer up for negotiation. The chains that once bound you, pain, regret, shame, fear, they're broken, not just loosened, not just temporarily set aside, broken. And what's left is someone who walks like they know who they are. Someone who doesn't just believe God can restore, but is living proof that He already has. This kind of restoration doesn't make you perfect. It makes you whole. It doesn't erase your story. It redeems it. And the most powerful part, God doesn't restore you back to where you were. He restores you forward into a version of yourself you never imagined possible. Stronger, softer, wiser, freer. So if you're in the waiting, the hurting, the breaking, hold on, because when God restores you, these signs will appear. And when they do, you won't just feel restored. You'll live it, breathe it, walk it. And the world around you will know God did that.